Hello, welcome back to another Friday Fireside. Just going to do a quick wrap up of the week because we have some exciting news, and then we'll get straight into our interview with the amazing Emily May. So, our big news, which I think we dropped a couple episodes in, is we will be launching our crowdfunding campaign. So, make sure to check that out. That's going to be coming on Monday, 9 a.m. British Standard Time. And it's really an exciting campaign that we focus on. The most dangerous word is just. So this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's around minimization and how that actually can cause problems with reporting, people seeking help, and really being able to see the scale of the problem so that we can address it more effectively. We also have some exciting news that the misogyny is a hate crime bill that's currently being under review in the UK, and that is something that the Member of Parliament Stella Creasy is putting on. If you want more information, we'd be happy to share it to you, but it does include looking at gender-based street harassment as something that could be escalated as a hate crime. So it's really exciting. It would require a lot more reporting from police and other organizations. So stay tuned there. And we will also be having soon on the Women's Equality Party, so make sure to tune in for that. But without further ado, I would love to, excuse the construction outside, I would love to introduce Emily May. She is the co-founder of Hollerbach that started in New York about 15 years ago. I think she just celebrated her 15-year anniversary, which is amazing. And she's really been pioneering the work in around street and sexual harassment. She's actually even been Gloria Steinman, who's one of the feminist icons, has even quoted that Emily has been one of her inspirations who are literally taking back the streets. You'll also probably have seen viral campaigns, but that they've also been working on. But they're now across 25 countries, if I'm correct, 50 cities, and just continuously growing and making an impact. So we're so happy to have you. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me, Jillian. Real honor to be here.
Amazing. So I don't even know how I could have, it's just such an honor to be able to speak with you and for you to share your wisdom with us. So could you tell us a little bit about your path to creating Hollerbach? And just in kind of precursor, I was watching your TEDx or your TED Talk at Women, and you were talking with a friend that really maybe started a spark around kind of how men and women are living in completely different cities and how they experience it. But I'd love to
Yeah,
hear more.
exactly. Yeah, I had actually, so I went to LSE, London School of Economics, and I just gotten back and was reconnecting with some old friends. And I had experienced street harassment like 3, 4 times a day. It felt like for years at that point. So it wasn't like, oh, it just happened. And I was like, let's do something about it. It was like constant. And I was talking to a friend of mine, Sam Carter, and he was like, Emily, I feel like we live in different cities. And yet Sam and I were otherwise like basically the same person. We both grew up in Richmond, Virginia. We both went to NYU for undergraduate. We both like had these careers in the nonprofit sector. But when it came to this singular issue, my experience of walking down the street was so dramatically different than his. And so Sam and I and our friends really resolved to change that. And we were inspired by a young woman named Tal Nguyen, who this was 2005. So you got to imagine like old school phones. Was riding the subway and a man sat down across from her and exposed himself and began to publicly masturbate. And she had had this happen to her before, but she pulled out her flip phone camera and kind of low-key took his picture, got off the subway and took it to the police. And they were like, look, this is what this guy did. And they were like, oh, sorry, miss, he's probably already 7 or 8 stops away. Nothing we can do at this point. And so Tal took that photo. She put it on Flickr, the photo sharing website at the time, and it went viral. And it made it to the front cover of our local newspaper here in New York. Everyone had a story. They knew somebody that had a story. My boss at the time had seen that exact guy masturbating on the subway across from her. And so we were just like, why does everyone have these stories and nobody's doing anything about it? And particularly as somebody who, in my undergraduate, really focused on the intersections between race and gender and sexuality and class, I was like, I have learned so many ways in which women experience oppression, but nobody's talking to me about street harassment. And so, we decided to start this little blog in 2005, having no idea that it would ever turn into, an organization, that we would ever be doing this work 15 years later. But it was just this little engine that could, and people were so eager and so hungry for it, that it took off beyond my wildest imagination.
Oh, that's so amazing. And I think you raise a good point in that, part of getting into this work, you see so much as you talk to more and more people, and you see that these are stories that are happening everywhere and all of the time, but it just seems to sit on the, underbelly of kind of what's being shown on the media, or, what discussions are going on in politics. But that was something I think that, 5 years later, you were in a hearing, one of the first in the world on street and sexual harassment in New York. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that was wild because it really was, to my knowledge, the first one that had ever happened. And it was really beautiful to see so many advocates coming forward, so many young people sharing personal stories of trying to get to and from school. There was a council member who's still in office named Jumani Williams, who, talked openly about how, when he was younger, he used to harass women because all of his friends harassed women. And that was just like what they did, and he openly apologized for any harm that he created in doing that, and committed to really shifting the culture that makes this stuff okay to begin with. And that partnership really led to, a longer term partnership with the city to figure out how we could meaningfully address it, which today has, pivoted into a partnership between the New York City Commission on Gender Equity, L'Oreal Paris, the global makeup brand, and us to train 40,000 people in New York before the end of next year to be able to stand up, to respond to street harassment. And we're really targeting those resources towards folks who are younger, who tend to be really under-resourced when it comes to this stuff still, right? It wasn't just me, 15 years ago being like, why isn't anybody talking to me about this? Still, there's really no resources when it comes to this stuff. It's not included in sexual health curriculums. Very few, if teachers do anything along these lines. It's really, folks feel like they're still alone. And I think that we have the power to combat that. And I think, having done this work for so long, having this work having started well before I got into it, we've made a lot of progress in these past, decades, but we have a long way to go still.
Yeah, and it was really interesting in your TED talk that you were talking about the different movements. I think it was the anti-flirt club, which is one of the first ones that you could find, to try to even ascribe a language of like, what is this thing that is just this consistent, you know, uh, nipping away, or even worse, this escalation and risk to your safety as you're just trying to, move or occupy spaces in, densely populated cities. But I
And
think
the anti-flirt, right? What a terrible, terrible name by contemporary standards, particularly contemporary feminist standards, where feminists are pro-sex, pro-pleasure, right? And they're like, no flirting. I'm like, and I saw that and I was like, what are they like? Are they doing something other than what I'm doing? Because I think this is awesome. Flirting,
yeah.
the language that they had, at the time. And the language around, calling it street harassment really didn't come into play until, academics started using it in the 80s, and only really has become mainstream, I would say, within the past 10 years, maybe even less. Like, it really isn't that long of a period of time that people have been using the word street harassment historically, other than flirting. But before that, the most common term was catcalling, right? Which also is minimizing it. A cat meowing is not creating harm. It's irritating, but it's not harm, where street harassment can be quite traumatizing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think I actually just saw a study. Actually, I want to fact check this because I just saw it scrolling through Instagram, so I can't verify this, but it was looking at PTSD and some quite scary figures about how much is caused by sexual and physical violence, but sexual street harassment coming into that. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think again, it's just an under resourced and researched space because a lot of people have difficulty knowing what to do when it happens. So, I mean, in following that, what was some of the purpose behind Hollerback from that one incident, that man who exposed himself to the public hearing, to the blog, like where has the evolution of Hollerback started then, and where is it going now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just thinking about, the relevance of this issue, studies on this issue, Holly Curl did that study showing that street harassment was the most commonly experienced form of sexual violence. And L'Oreal Paris and Ipsos, a research firm, did a study across 10 different countries showing of all the issues impacting women in those 10 different countries, which were all across the globe. Street harassment was the number one issue that women consistently cited, even above equal pay, which was pretty consistently number two on those issues. So this is a huge issue, right? Impacting women in particular, but of course, impacting all folks to some degree. And at Hollaback, we really started on this issue, I think, first and foremost, just wanting to give people hope, to tell people that they weren't alone. We started documenting this issue because people told us that it wasn't a problem, that it didn't happen. And we felt like the only way to really show people that it happened was to tell our stories, which is not a new form of social change. I think it's potentially the oldest form of social change. But technology gave us some cool new ways to do that, to map that. We developed an app. And then I think we started to see, and train local leaders all around the world to really lead this movement in their own communities. And I think that, energetically led to a place where now I think people generally understand that street harassment happens. They generally understand that it's not okay. I think what they fail to understand is how it impacts people differently based on their identity. And I think that's kind of the work ahead of us. They fail to understand the way that it impacts people of color disproportionately, LGBTQ folks disproportionately, low-income people, young people disproportionately, right? And I think we have to understand that to really understand the problem itself and to really be able to effectively target those solutions. And so, in our own evolution towards, having always identified with, an intersectional approach to feminism, but really moving further along to look at, how can we not just have gender be the front door to our work, but have things like, race, sexuality, ability also be front doors into our work. Because, one of my very, very early on in the start of Hollaback, a friend who was working with Hollaback named Kimberlyn said, I don't know if when I'm harassed, it's because I'm a woman, because I'm gay, or because I'm Latinx, right? And so it's the sort of almost bucketing it in a gender bucket is a little bit of a false container to put it in. It's never fully clear. And so, we have been increasingly doing work to think about and partner with folks focusing on other forms of harassment as well, which has been a phenomenal thing. And we really haven't moved the drumbeat off of the issue of harassment in doing that. This partnership with L'Oreal Paris is designed to train 1 million people globally in bystander intervention, which honestly, like, have imagined when we started this work. I mean, even like, when they were filming the manifesto for the campaign, like being on set and they would have all these little signs, it was in France, but they would have all these little signs saying "Le cause," like as if it was the only cause.
Yes.
On the planet other than street harassment, and they've gotten a great response for it. And, they're really looking at having that be their leading cause for the next 15 to 20 years, which is huge, a huge amount of attention to the issue. And, but it's really led by, women feeling comfortable standing up and saying, you know what, this isn't okay for us, right? We're not going to accept this anymore. This is the number one issue that's keeping us down, and we want somebody to do something about it. And I think, it's activists like you, for example, who really paved that way for, people to feel comfortable saying that, feel comfortable even admitting that it hurts, that it's not okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's such an interesting shift that you mentioned, that, industry is starting to see actually, not only is this a concern that we can lend our weight to, but this is also impacting people in different ways that also impacts business. I think, we were talking before about how there has been an interesting trend after the Me Too to really look at the workplace sexual harassment, which has kind of, maybe steered some of the attention away from the kind of larger issue of actually it's happening in all types of spaces, even public spaces. But yeah, do you think that with some of this change is that companies trying to look at their inner kind of circle to impact first and then kind of looking outward, or what do you think is some of the shifts there?
Yeah, I think there's a focus on harassment in the workplace, more so compared to harassment in the street or even online. Because I think, as much as we don't like to admit it, you know, the we're working within capitalism, right? And there's more money behind addressing harassment in the workplace than there is in addressing harassment in different sectors, right? And I also think people have a bit more hope that we can address harassment in the workplace as well, because there's more systems, there's more infrastructure, there's laws that you can pass mandating employers. Whereas I think still to this day, the street feels like the Wild Wild West, right? The street feels like, in order to make change, we have to change the culture that is sexist, and change the culture that is racist, and change the culture that is homophobic. And that feels, I think, like too big of a chunk to bite off. But here's my bit with that, which is when it comes to harassment in the workplace, people can intellectually come up with reasons why they think it's going to be easier to address, but ultimately it's the same problem. Just like street harassment, it's a symptom of that sexist, racist, homophobic culture that we're living in, right? And so, I think that we really have to create movements that see the whole person. We've talked already about seeing the whole person in terms of all of your, identities, but also seeing the whole person in terms of all the places where you go. Like your heart, when you experience harassment, doesn't put it in a different place because this harassment happened on the street and that harassment happened at work and that harassment happened online. Like your heart feels it all in the same place. And so I think we really need to create, movements that are inclusive of that.
That's such a beautiful way of saying that, because you're right in that, this impacts, and it does have a cumulative impact, especially as you said, like this is something that wasn't new to you at 24 when you started Hollerback. It was something that you probably experienced for many years. Like myself, it was from, adolescence, if not maybe even earlier childhood. So this is a cumulative thing that just compounds and compounds, and some escalate to maybe where people take it a lot more seriously of sexual assault. But then, again, there's this large weighting of the continuous harassment of all types of characteristics that people have. And it does impact you psychologically, in terms of your personal safety, in terms of your occupation of different spaces or choices. So those are so key. And I'm really glad too that, with Hollerback, you are looking at mapping these issues, because those spaces are also important to understand where do we, train, or where can we actually intervene to best address these issues. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I guess I wanted to ask too. I mean, you've taken on this huge challenge around the world. I mean, in terms of course, you're collaborating and you have different chapters in their local communities and languages. But how have you dealt with kind of your own mental, well-being, and taking on such a difficult topic and seeing all of these horrific stories on a very frequent basis, and dealing with backlash, and having to face those sexist, racist, homophobic, monsters on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to say it hasn't been easy or any kind of like a particularly like eloquent path on my part. It's been a lot of hard work, a lot of trial and error. There's some stuff, particularly if I'm like not ready for it, like if I like read something like on the couch at like 7 a.m., right? That just like hits me like in the gut, still to this day. And there's, certainly early on when we started this, people would, they're like great rebuttal, that they're like fantastic rebuttal to, why street harassment wasn't a problem and I was overreacting, was that I was like too unattractive to be harassed, right? And so all of like the comments every time we would do anything publicly would be like about how unattractive and dumb whatever I was. Like even now there's like 30-minute videos on YouTube just dedicated to how ugly I am. Like, and like you have to, I think for me anyway, like the thing that kept bringing me back is that I feel like this is what I am meant to do in this world, in this lifetime. Maybe not the next one, but in this lifetime. Like I feel called to do it. And I don't mean that in like an overly religious way. Like I just feel like I am in alignment with my purpose in doing this work, which is what really keeps me coming back to it. And, I am lucky to have had phenomenal mentors along the way and coaches along the way. Adria Goodson is my executive coach now. She's been my coach for, 5 years. LaWanda Thompson was my somatics coach, which is really about processing how trauma works its way like through your body, how your body expresses trauma, or even just your life experiences and how it shows up. She's now moving on to be the chair of our board, while P.S. she looks for a cure for COVID-19 at Johnson & Johnson. So, I've been like blessed with amazing resources to figure out how to navigate it, but it's been a long haul, and I think that I've come out a lot stronger, but even still, there's things sometimes that just like this just hit me, right? Mm-hmm. And that I have to like remind myself, like, you are whole, you are okay, like you're gonna like get through this, and like, and if this ever becomes not what you're supposed to do, you will know that too, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna take on into this job in this field beyond where I feel like I am needed and necessary.
Amazing. And being able to shoulder on all of that is just so incredible. And I very much celebrate all of your work and efforts to do that. It's definitely an inspiration, and some of the things that I saw early on when building Safe in the City, that there were other people working on this issue. There's still far and few in between, but there was a lot of movement, and I think a lot of that has been thanks to Hollerbach paving the way and yourself. So yeah, I would love to kind of wrap up, as I know you're just starting your day in New York. So again, maybe around the kind of importance of sharing our story, you mentioned it was kind of one of the earliest ways that people could really affect change, and maybe a message to leave with. How can people share their stories?
Yeah. So, when it comes to sharing your story, I think it is the most revolutionary thing that you can do still, and even now where we have gotten to a place where people understand that street harassment exists, that it matters, movements start to falter. They start to lose purpose when people stop coming forward and boldly telling their stories. And I think we have to continue to do that, because when we, and research that we did with researcher Jill Diamond showed this, when you share your story through Hollaback, although I'm sure through your platform too, it moves that story from something that we see as a personal problem, to something that we start to imagine as a societal problem. It starts to take the personalization away from it. And we know, even though I felt it personally, I didn't actually personally do anything to cause it. And I think that's something that everyone knows in their head, but what sharing your story does is it helps your heart to learn that, right? It helps your heart to learn, like, actually, this wasn't my fault. And we see as a result of that, people are then a lot more willing to take action, even just like talking to their employers or dads about it, because they know that it wasn't because of what they were wearing or the time of day that they were out at night. And I think that's so important and, and powerful. And folks, can certainly share their story on your site, on ihollaback.org. We also have a free app. We have another platform called HeartMob. That's iheartmob.org, where folks can share stories of online harassment and get support for that. And we do have these free public trainings that we're offering for folks who have not yet been trained in bystander intervention. There's also tips in there on how to respond when you yourself experience harassment. So check out our website for those as well. They're 1 hour interactive and a lot of fun.
Amazing. And yeah, we'll make sure that we link all of those in the kind of notes so that you can quickly gain access. And if you haven't done a bystander training, I've even done a Hollerbach bystander training when I was just coming up with the idea in London. And I found it so valuable, especially, as you said, in the community that brings together, and how many stories that you feel open to share, or you see the similarities and you feel that there is a bit of a release or a catalyst to being able to process that information and get it out there to make a difference. So thank you again, Emily. This was so wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again, and have a lovely day and weekend, and we'll speak to you soon. Thanks for joining, everyone.